I want to give a shout out to Denisha and Amanda, who originally researched and developed this presentation. I've worked with C-STEP, the Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession, for the past year, where I designed some synchronous and asynchronous learning to help us navigate distance learning. So I've adapted this presentation, but Denisha and Amanda, whose names are on the screen, were the original creators, and I just want to give a shout out. And as my job title suggests, I'm going to be facilitating our learning, and it's going to depend upon you. So welcome to the team. Let's get started. All right. So I am a huge fan of Simon Sinek and his golden theory, golden circle principle. Ooh, Castle Rock, not too far from me. And I always want to start with the why, but I want to give you just a brief overview of what the golden circle is in case you haven't heard it, but I encourage you to go and look up Simon Sinek's TED Talk if you haven't heard about it. Most people, when they engage in activities, they start with the what. What is it that I'm doing? And then they go to the how. How am I going to do it? So what I do is I coach teachers, and how I do it is I provide PD, and then I try to sign up teachers to go through a coaching cycle to improve their practice. And why I do this is because my last year in the classroom, 6 years ago, I taught a blended learning project-based instructional model, and I saw kids come alive. And they were authentic learners, they were advocates of their own learners, and they reestablished a love affair with learning because it was totally student-driven. And that is why I became an IF, because I wanted to spread that throughout the school that I work in. So what Simon Sinek noticed was that true innovators, they actually start with the why. And because people don't necessarily buy your product as well as they buy your passion. And we know this about students, right? They work harder for the teachers that they care about, and even harder for the teachers that they know care about them. So my why is really that I want students to reestablish a love affair with learning and become authentic learners. And so how I do that is I engage with teachers and meet the teachers where their needs are to help them also engage their students. And so I am an instructional facilitator. So our why today is because I think a lot of us saw this screen when we went to distance learning. So I want to just ask you to do a quick question. If you saw this screen during your teaching, and I'm curious because we have a lot of kindergarten teachers, and I have heard that the lower grades were more willing to turn on their cameras. But if you saw the icon screen during any point of your distance learning teaching, can you give me an amen in the chat, please? All right, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't my perspective. And I saw this in meeting with teachers, and I had my icon on a lot for a lot of different reasons. So we can't make judgments, right? And I want to go to what students actually had to say about this. So here is a quote from a student. I'm at home in my own space, and it feels weird when my classmates and my teachers can see me when I'm in my private space. Another student said that, and I'm guilty of this, he noticed that he was spending more time looking at his camera and worrying about his appearance than being engaged in the lesson and during the class. And I have to say, I would also be, for those who did share their screens and they had the virtual backgrounds, I would be distracted by the fact that, you know, one of my teachers was flying a TIE fighter during a PD. So anyway, another student said, when I turn my camera off, it's kind of like when we're in class, just facing the same way, and I'm able to focus on the teacher and the lesson. As a building, we decided early on that we weren't going to make our students turn on their cameras and their mics for equity issues, because it was kind of invasive going into their room. And I appreciate what you guys are saying in the chat. I am reading them. So yeah, I mean, it's tough though, because it's like teaching to a wall, right? And so then when we went to a blended learning model where we had half the kids 2 days a week and the other half another 2 days a week. And one teacher said, it's painfully obvious that they, being students, are less social when we go hybrid. They come in and they don't know how to speak out loud and with each other. And I noticed that when I would be in classrooms, I noticed that the students had a good relationship with the teachers a lot of the times because the teachers had cultivated that. But they really weren't engaging with each other because it had been a year since they had done that. And they hadn't even done that socially. So that is our why today. Community building is not a ground-breaking topic, right? It's not something that's just revolutionary. It's something that we all are aware of and do. But today we're going to really hit home how it is more important than ever, because as our students come back, they're going to come back with different anxieties. They're going to come back with the fact that if we don't set up structures to help them engage with one another, it won't happen. And with the new variant, I feel like the box is being shaken up again. And so I just think it's something that's worth revisiting today so that we can help our students reestablish a love affair with learning. That's what it's all about. So engaging them authentically. So our learning objectives today are that you will engage in some community building activities so that you can understand the positive effects. And you'll know you have it when you kind of have some more tools in your toolbox maybe, or be reinvigorated about what we're talking about today. So I'm going to give you periodically through this presentation some time to pause and reflect. And I've actually engaged in two activities or strategies already to kind of help establish some community. If you think you can describe it, can you put it in the chat? Can you recognize some of the things that we have done today so far? Right. Connecting to where you are, which is part of your identity, absolutely. Incorporating student voice in doing that, absolutely. Oh yeah, and Rachel, I didn't even think about having everybody say amen. That's just like, you know, engaging student voice, even in the smallest way. Making connections with people as they enter, right? I was trying to read the chat and comment as people said where they were from if I had a connection to that, absolutely. And the other thing that we did was hopefully, you know, it took me a few minutes to go through the golden circle, but I wanted to create and establish some learner relevance. And that's part of the reason why I also had you give me the amen, to make sure that I was presenting this in a way that was relevant to you. So already we've done two things to kind of start us off with establishing some community. So I'm going to tell you a story real quick. And the story is, where should I sit? So I grew up my whole life being pretty shy. And people don't believe it now because I talk for a living and I appear to do it pretty well, but my stomach was a little anxious yesterday, and so there's a hidden level of anxiety in the things that I do when I present myself. But especially when you go into a room and you go into a staff meeting and you're the first few there, you don't see your buddies or you're new, and it's like, where do I sit? Where do I sit? Will somebody come and sit next to me, or will I be that person that's all alone as the room fills up? Well, our kids experience that as well when they walk into the lunchroom, into the classroom, and it's a source of anxiety. And at the high school level, they have to do that like 6 times in the first day, and it can be a real stressor. So I always started the school year off with a seating chart activity. It wasn't that I necessarily already knew my kids well enough to do the, intentional pairing and partnering, but it was something where I would put college icons on the desk, and then I would give them, as they walk through the door, the name of the college, and they would have to go match it up and sit down. And those who really wanted to sit by somebody because that was their comfort person, they could pretend that they didn't know that the University of Washington are the Huskies, who doesn't know that? But, I'm joking because I went to UW, but or I do something else so that it wasn't necessarily a seating chart that I had designed, but it was a way that the kids could have a means of having an assigned place to sit down. And they had to talk to each other a little bit if they didn't know who and whatever the game was, whatever the matching game was. Sometimes they do it with vocabulary in the middle of the year, just to kind of shake things up. So there are things that we can do from the very beginning that help us establish sort of a comfort, safe zone for our kids to enter our room, and hopefully they'll be entering our room. Okay, I'm sorry, I just saw what Christina had said. So sorry. And thank you, Peter, for mentioning that in the chat. I actually paused for a moment last night, and I should have paused longer and thought of something else. So thank you so much for pointing that out about the amen. So I think that games have a great way of having us engage with our kids. It lowers anxiety. And there are a number of attendance games that you can play where you ask a question, and then as you take attendance, the students answer it. But today we're going to play a quick round of Would You Rather to kind of build some community here amongst us. So the rules of this game is that as each slide appears, you're going to determine which one you would rather do. And in the chat, and you don't necessarily have to type I would rather, but you can just say which of the two you would rather do, and then give just a little bit of an elaboration. Okay, maybe why you chose that. And then also I want you to read through other people's comments, and I want you to make a comment. I want you to join and agree with somebody who chose the way you did, ask a question of somebody who maybe said something different. Is there anything I can clarify for you before we start with our first slide? Because I know I'm moving pretty fast. All right, we're going to go to our first Would You Rather. Would you rather live 100 years in the future or 100 years in the past? And you can just answer with future or past and give your answer or some of your thought process behind it. So we've got a future and a past, a future. Ooh, a lot of the past. Oh, that's really cool about knowing your grandparents. I'm going through a lot of our photos, and I've run across the wedding pictures of my grandparents from the 1920s. And it would be cool to know and talk to some of the people that were there in that picture. You know, when I look at going back to the past, I think, but can we have modern dentistry, please? Little House on the Prairie. Debbie, when I lived in Kansas, I got to be a museum reenactor where my daughter and I put on everything from 1870, and it was like Wichita, Kansas in 1870, and we even our lunches had to be time appropriate. Thank you for responding, Amanda, to Renee. I like that. Okay, so it's not just about seeing what everybody else would do, and please feel free to scroll up and down with the chat so that you can see. It's about the conversation, right, that the kids would have about their answers. And it's important when you pick your topics at the beginning of the year to be pretty light, and you can get a little bit deeper as the year goes on. But I would think that this would even work in kindergarten. So you might do pictures and you might do it verbally. Okay. Next one. Would you rather eat moldy bread or eat moldy cheese? Okay. When I did this one before with some staff, somebody said, well, cheese, because it's already moldy. Good deal. Nobody picked bread? Is that what I'm seeing?
We had a few neithers, you know,
Yeah.
no takers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and here is the tough one. Now we're getting, gonna get deep here, guys. And nobody at any grade level be offended, please. It has nothing to do with the grade level. But would you rather chaperone all by yourself 30 kindergartners at the zoo or 30 middle schoolers at the opera? All right, we've got a really mixed bag here. And if I was to go back, or if we had the opportunity to use our voices, I would be curious if the kindergartners are the lower grade teachers and the middle schoolers are the upper grade teachers, if that's where our split is between who would want to go to the zoo versus who would want to take the middle schoolers to the opera. Everyone has their niche. That's right. I came into teaching by substituting. I was in advertising first, and I thought, I had little kids, I thought I'd be an elementary school teacher, and I fell in love with fifth grade. A little bit smelly in the fifth grade, and then I graduated up to high school, but yep, I like the older kids. Everybody has their niche. K-5 PE teacher, good deal. I think you can handle it all. Okay, love it. So this is just a real quick way that you can get to know your kids in a low stress, low anxiety way. And so I want to tell you just about another fun activity that I've done with my students, and that is Bunko. So I don't know if you're familiar with Bunko. It's a dice game. You're paired up with in fours. And so if you are working with groups of four, but you want to have your kids mingle with absolutely everybody in the room, then you can stop and play Bunko, and you can set a time limit to see who wins at each table, so you're not going as long as sometimes the rounds take. And then once you've played one round of Bunko, you have your kids move to the appropriate table and look up the rules of Bunko if you don't know. And then you do whatever you're doing next and have them do their think, pair, share, or their group activity. And then when you want to move them again, you can play Bunko again. It's great for staff as well. Herding cats and training puppies. I love that. All right, so I'm going to give you time again to pause and reflect. And I want you to think about my story about my seating anxiety. How would you, how did sharing that story help build community? Answer it in the chat, or you can just think about it to yourself. But I did that intentionally. I shared a vulnerability intentionally. So how would that build community? And then how does the seating chart, just absolutely the physicality of the seating chart, help build community as well? And Emily asked a question about the screen moving. Is anybody else having issues with that? Oh, Christina, thank you. Yeah, seating chart is a low stakes icebreaker, absolutely, especially if you do a matching game or something. So you can, if people complain about a seating chart, you can say, I haven't said it. You guys, you know, we'll see where you end up. And I think too, yeah, opening yourself up as a vulnerable person helps our students open themselves up. And I think, you know, sometimes I think our kids think that we are put on a shelf at the end of the day, or that we were born, you know, 40, 50, 30, 20, but adults and haven't been through the experiences or have the same feelings that they do. So, yep, thank you for recognizing that. And I don't know if you noticed this, but did you notice that instead of asking if you had any questions, I asked, what can I clarify? Do you think that that has an effect on our students as well and their willingness to ask questions? The first question was, how would sharing a story, a personal story, help build community? Peter, you bring up a really good point about transparency in what we do. And I think that that is really important. You know, at the high school level especially, sometimes kids will, you know, balk at something until they understand the why. You know, I think it's always important to talk about the why. Yeah, and if you've got a student who's reluctant to talk, it kind of puts by asking, is there anything else I can clarify, puts the onus on me that maybe I didn't say the directions clear enough, not on the student that they don't understand. So it's kind of putting, if there's a burden to have or a stigma, it's putting it on me as the teacher. What else can I do? Because maybe I didn't explain things well enough, not that you didn't understand well enough. Yeah. All right. I want to talk a little bit about setting norms. So you have to show a picture of norm, right? Now is the time to go to the answer garden. It's pinned at the top. It's in a blue band. And if you click on it, it will take you to a website. And it's asking you to type in what values are at the root of how you interact with others. And what you only have 20 characters to respond. So like a one-word answer would be great. So if you want to leave this open, click on the link and type in what values are at the root of how you interact with other people. So what is important to you, and as far as what you would receive, and what is important to give in your interactions with others. And thank you, Erin, for reposting that. And I am going to hop over real quick and share the answer garden so we can see it populate with your words. And I'm going to hit the refresh button every now and then. If you have not set up an answer garden, this is free. The answer garden, this will only live for like a week and I haven't figured out if you can actually create an account. So if anybody knows that, that would be great. But it makes like a Wordle. And the more times somebody uses a word, then it makes it bigger so that you can have a really good visual for with your students or your staff of what is significant to the group. So I'm seeing connection and relationships, but there are some other things in there too. I'm just looking at my other screen here real quick. Compassion and empathy, listening, connecting, hearing everybody, shared vulnerability, transparency, showing respect. Think iceberg, golden rule, listening, trustworthy, humor and connection. And a lot of the smaller things fit into those bigger ones. But our big theme, I'm just going to refresh it one more time, seems to be connection, relationships, and honesty. Okay. So I am actually going to post one more thing in the chat, and it is a Padlet. And I didn't know ahead of time what you were going to come up with as your big word. So with connection in mind or relationships, we can probably add that as well. I am going to have you go to a Padlet. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen with the Padlet. Boy, I'm being really slow today. With connections in mind, I want you to type in, what does making connections look like? What does, and you're already on it, I love it. What does it sound like? And that's kind of a GLAD strategy that I've been using for a long time. And I think Avid might be who threw in the, what does it feel like? If you're a student, and this is kind of from a student perspective, if I'm a student or I'm a participant in a community and I'm being connected with, what is that? How does that make me feel? How does that make me feel? I love what you guys are saying on here about what it sounds like too, saying positive things, using positive words, listening and participating in conversations. That's what it looks like. And when I had have taught or worked with teachers of younger kids, I'll even, go in to elaborate. If somebody were to come into this classroom blindfolded and they were listening for connections, what would they hear? What words would be coming out of our mouths, and vice versa. If somebody had sound canceling headphones on, what would they see? I love it. Thank you so much. So you can keep connecting through the Padlet if you would like. I'm going to come back to our presentation, and I want to talk about the difference really quick between rules and norms. So rules typically are developed by the teacher, and norms are developed by the community. And I started kind of with the core values that we have when we're interacting with each other, so that then we could build norms based on, what we really value, hoping that it wouldn't just go to the typical turn your cell phone off, be present, kind of taking a little bit of a different look. And so that's why I set it up based on the core values first. Rules keep things running smoothly, and they keep our environment safe. Rules aren't necessarily always a bad thing. When you establish norms, though, you establish kind of how can we, as this group of people, learn best together. And it might be different for each classroom that you have, each group of kids each year, because they might have different things that they consider important. Rules are often non-negotiable, and I think that norms, it's important. If something was left out, I've had kids say, can we add this to the list of norms, because I think it's really important. So norms can evolve, and they can even change depending on the task that you guys are engaged in. Rules get followed, norms get upheld. And one funny thing that happened in one of my senior classes was if somebody used a bad word, I said they had a potty mouth and they had to give me a potty pass, which is something that they would get them out of the classroom if they needed to take care of something. And at the end of the quarter, the ones they had left over was extra credit to try to keep them engaged in my class. And they started policing each other with the potty mouth. And they were like, Griffin, potty pass over here, because it became a norm. It became a norm, and that was really cool to see. Rules are oftentimes feel like they're being enforced where norms are agreed upon, and rules prevent chaos. I can say voices off, lids down, whatever. But if it is a norm established by the kids, it builds accountability. And the reason why I bring this up, it's probably familiar to most of us, but rules are often teacher-focused, or at least they're viewed that way, and norms are more student-centered, and they tend to focus a little bit on collaborative learning and engagement. And so as we are moving our kids back into the classroom, hopefully, and reestablishing the relationships with their peers and the relationship with learning, I think it's important to involve them and give them that voice in establishing how are we going to engage in learning together. So, revisiting the concept of the answer garden, if you were to create a norm based on the word cloud, or based on, and looks like I jumped my order a little bit, which we already did, based on the look, hear, and feel, can we just put in the chat what some of those norms might be? Listen to each other. And I would say we're doing that through the chat, so it doesn't always have to be a voice that is heard. Be on time. Be kind. Listen to understand, speak your truth. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing that. We're going to actually come to that in a little bit. A lot of people don't know that caps are like shouting in text messages. Be respectful. So you can hopefully see how going through this activity can help establish relatively quickly a list of norms that you can engage with in your class. So if I was wanting to go lower tech, which is how I started this process, I would have a poster on my wall that might look something like this, but the Padlet works as well too. So I'm going to give you just a minute to pause and reflect again and ask, when establishing a set of norms as the class, what impact does adding what it looks like, sounds like, and especially feels like have on establishing a sense of community? How might that feel different than if you are just generating a list without going through and touching on the look like, sound like, and feel like? Ownership. Concrete examples, inclusion. Because what it looks like to one person, what it might look like to me, it might look completely different. Just to be vulnerable, I started teaching in Kansas and moved to Yakima, and the diversity in Kansas was not nearly as rich as it is in Yakima. And so I was used to respect being eye contact. But respect is not eye contact for all cultures. And so I had to learn that. And it would be important for, the student to be able to voice what respect looks like so that I can know what it is to them and not just assume because it doesn't fit how I was raised to receive or give respect. To know that from a student's perspective is hugely important for me as a teacher. I said that really badly, but all are given a chance to share. Yeah. So given that, I want to talk just a little bit about equity and social justice. So we talk a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion, but there's also a component of social justice. And I really liked this graphic and the explanations, the brief explanations of it. But I talked a little bit just briefly about how it was for me when I came to a school that had a lot more diverse cultures. I had a parent-teacher conference with a student, and I was talking about test scores and grades. I just kind of dove right in because that's my personality and that is what I was used to with the parents that I was conferencing with. They were predominantly white. And, so I'm going through all of this list of things and how well the student's doing. And it was even a good conference. This was with a good student. And the parent stopped me and said, "But why don't you like my child?" And I was like, "What do you mean, why don't I like your child?" "Well, you haven't talked to me about if they're respectful, or, you haven't said anything about, them as a person. it's just all about the numbers. Do you know my child? Do you like my child? And it was just one of those things that struck me, because I was coming from it with my approach and not thinking about how I should approach it from what the parent was wanting to hear. Another example of my faux pas was I used to tell my kids, if you have a question about your grade or if you need help, don't come to me between classes, because I'm like changing gears and I'm maybe switching from freshmen to seniors, and I'm trying to, do the best for the class coming in. And I didn't quite say it that way, but I'm like, it was kind of my policy, come in before school or after school. And that was absolutely not being equitable, inclusive. It was not an act of social justice, because not all students can come in, have the luxury of coming in before school or after school if they've got a bus to catch or siblings to take care of. So this has been something that has been on my heart as I have been going through my teaching profession and growing as a teacher. So just a couple things for us to think about as we are engaging and building a community. I started out by asking who is in the room and getting some information and making some connections. But we also need to think about who might be trying to get in the room and why they can't. Whose presence in the room might be under threat of being erased, not considered, or minimalized. And I had to kind of think about that with my practice. Have everyone's ideas been heard? So the quiet person in the corner of the room that never speaks up, what can we do to help them be aware, to pause and listen so that everybody has a voice? I always hesitate about cold calling on that person, because that might be a really huge source of the anxiety. So if I have an opportunity when I'm walking around and I see on their paper that they've got something really great to say, or they turned in an assignment that had something really great to say, I might go and ask them, would it be okay if I asked you to share that with the class? Just lots of different ways to try to make sure that every voice is heard. And that's even opening up counter narratives, opportunities for kids to share counter narratives, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if I just want you to look at this a little bit and think about it. What is it that I'm doing that might not be creating a safe space for all my kids?
Heidi, we have a quick question in the chat. Will we be sharing this presentation afterwards?
So I saw that, and I don't know. Is that a C-STEP okay thing to do?
I think we can do that. So
Okay.
We'll get in touch with AESD, and Rosemary and Emily, I'll share my email so you can also email me. We'll get that to you.
Yeah, I can save this before I just put the link in the chat. I will save it because I'm always switching up the presentation a little bit to meet the needs of the group. And so, so Erin, really quickly, what is the best way to do that?
After the session, you could just email it to me, and we'll get it to everyone.
And we'll make sure that it gets out there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And thank you for asking for that. I appreciate that as well on presentations, but I wasn't sure if I could. So one of the big important things, and you mentioned it, somebody mentioned it when we started off, and I asked you to reflect on what I'd already done to help establish a sense of community, and that was student voice. And again, with this platform, it's kind of frustrating because I would have done a few other different things. But one of the things that I will make sure is in the presentation and accessible to you through the slides is a lesson plan that talks about the importance of students speaking their authentic truths. And so why should we invite students to tell their stories? It gives students an opportunity to be present, to be a participant, and it brings their identity and expertise in the classroom. Funny that it's, it kind of steps away from the sage on the stage, with which this presentation is too much of. But it also interrupts stereotypes. Teachers don't have to make assumptions or guesses based on limited information. They can get more of a sense of who the person is. It's kind of a touchy thing because it can cause stress, but it can also alleviate stress if done correctly. And I think one of the reasons why I teach through story, I've told a number of stories just in this last little short bit, because it creates that open space, hopefully, for others to be vulnerable and share their story too. But it is something to be mindful of. In fact, what I'm going to do is, let's see. I'm going to make sure this link is the right one. Yep. I'm going to place a link in the chat to this article if you want a little bit more information. It's kind of a brief article, so it's a quick read. But it talks about the importance of student voice and students sharing their stories. And I think especially when you create a structured opportunity for kids to just give their story. So, and this is in that link that I gave you. When I've done this training before, I've actually done this activity where I've asked participants to think of a way in which they are counter to a narrative that might be assumed about you. And you go around, and it's called serial testimonies, and each person has a certain amount of time to tell their story. And the job of the listener is just to listen, not to comment. And that is something that I have a hard time with, because I want to make the connection. I want to jump in and say, oh, me too, or add my story to it, which kind of minimizes the person's story who's sharing. And I'm learning this about myself. And so there, you go through a protocol where the kids know that they just listen, and they go around and they share some of their stories so that they can get to know each other in a genuine and authentic way. So I'm going to give you a minute just to kind of look at how you would go through that, the list here on the slide, or you can open up the, I think it might be a PDF from the link.
There was a question in the chat for clarification on teaching it correctly. Is there a wrong way to do it, or is there a right way to teach stories or telling stories?
Oh, if I said that, I misspoke. So are you talking, is the question, Kathy, about the protocol? Because I think what I was referring to was, I'm a big person on providing procedures for things that I'm asking my students to do, so that just like the seating chart, they know who's talks first, and it might be who's wearing the lightest color tennis shoes, or whose birthday is closest to today, just to take away that anxiety. So this is just a list of things to help students know how to respect the speaker and the story. And so if I said correctly, I meant maybe to provide the most opportunity for inclusion. Kathy, does that make sense? I don't know that there's an incorrect way of doing it, so long as students don't feel stressed or anxious, so that students have an opportunity to feel safe in opting out, that students just feel safe. Because when we're asking them to open up and share a story, we want to make sure that it's not adding stress. It's done in a way that is respectful to the student's position where they're at. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. It takes a very safe environment, and this is not something that you would do until you have established a certain level of community in your classroom. So in our last couple minutes, because boy, this time went really fast and it's going to shut me off in a minute, couple things to keep in mind. This is not something to be done just in the first 3 days of school. You want to continually schedule this throughout your year with your kids, and it can be socially based. It does not always have to be instructional, because the time that you invest up front in building your community, you get in academic achievement in the end, because you get so much authentic learning accomplished. One thing I will do, Erin, is include my email as well when we send out that PowerPoint if you have any questions. So I want to thank you so much for listening, for typing in the chat, and I hope you have a really, really great day.